All right, well, welcome to this session. Appreciate everybody showing up. We have an hour to talk about this topic, demystifying healthcare technology, bridging the executive technical gap. And this is, healthcare technology needs a lot of demystifying because it's exciting and confusing at the same time. And a lot of people who are not technology oriented often will just kind of avoid it because they don't like to admit that they don't understand things. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But I've had a chance to chat with a couple of you guys here. Let me tell you the perspective that I'm coming from on this. I didn't know if we'd have people who work in the healthcare field here or more people that are servicing the healthcare field. So is there anybody here that works in a hospital or physician office or somebody on the provider side? Okay, do we have one? Okay, and I assume everyone else is kind of working with companies that sell to hospitals or relate to healthcare in some way? Okay, good. So the perspective I took on this, I figured it'd be a blend like that. My perspective is from an industry insider, what I call an internal enthusiast in the healthcare setting. So in other words, somebody who works in a healthcare setting and says, man, I've just seen some really neat technology. I want to get it. I need to explain this within the organization. I need to figure out how to get other people excited about this. So the issues that they face are really the same issues that a lot of times the people selling to healthcare are facing as well. So in other words, you're both interested in convincing people who may or may not get health technology that they should take a look at what you have. So I think this will be equally applicable for people that are in the provider side as well as people that are trying to get more traction in the provider side. So let me just give you an outline of what we're going to talk about. A real quick background, where I'm coming from and why I know something about this. I'll give some objectives and takeaways, talk about why this topic matters. I'll give you a status of the industry. And then I like to divide things into categories. So I have what I call the two big buckets of healthcare technology, and I'll explain what that means later. And then within one of those buckets, I have something called the four fronts of health technology revolution, and that'll make sense once we get there. And then finally, we'll deal with requirements for success and then avoiding pitfalls. So this whole thing is designed to help people understand. Well, let me give you my background first. Glenn Pearson's my name. I was executive vice president at Georgia Hospital Association for 19 years, and I actually have 30 years experience working in the hospital field. So part of my job at GHA, I worked with the finance area and data and technology and IT and communications and vendor relations and entrepreneurial services. So I covered a lot of areas, and I was sort of the go-to guy whenever we were dealing with a technology issue. I was telling somebody this morning, I'm the technology guy, but I'm not a technology guy. I don't even update the OS on my phone because I'll probably do it wrong. So I'm not a CIO, I'm not a programmer, I don't do any of that stuff, but I understand and love the way technology can help transform processes. So whenever anything came up like Y2K or HIPAA related issues or whatever, I'm actually also the founding president of what is now the Georgia Health Information Network, which is the health information exchange statewide in Georgia. So I'm coming at this from the executive side. So I understand the executive mindset, I understand the financial side, I understand how to make technology work within an organization. So that's really, my background. What I'm doing now is I formed a company called Pearson Health Tech Insights, and I'm helping bridge the gap between this whole thing, between the executive side and the technology side, and I help companies trying to sell into hospitals figure out how to do that the right way. And the other way around, because a lot of hospital people don't get technology, they're afraid of it, and I'll talk about that later. So that's kind of my background. So here's what I'd like to accomplish today. What I'd like to do is provide a framework to help you understand technology's many complexities, including, first of all, why this is important, status of the industry, and giving an outline for categorizing technology development. So, one of the things about technology is that it's so broad that health technology includes everything from smartphone apps to mainframes in hospitals and dealing with medical devices. So when you say healthcare technology, people really don't know what you're talking about, or it's easy for them to be confused. So I want to give a framework to help understand that. Secondly, I'd like to give some strategic insights to help you see how technology can achieve your corporate goals if you're in the provider side. And for those of you selling to providers, your understanding of what their needs are will help you do a better job of targeting your material and your messaging to them. And then the third thing is giving practical advice to help you successfully implement emerging technology initiatives. So again, if you're a vendor, you need to help your internal enthusiasts in the provider community convince the people that they need to convince. So this will give you some insights into that. So I hope that makes sense. So here are what the session's purposes are and are not. It's not designed to be in any way technical. First of all, I'm not qualified, like I said, to do that. And it really, I don't think it would be very helpful to you anyway. It does not deal with the details of EHRs or IT infrastructure, interoperability, compliance, any of that stuff. I'm not dealing with any of those details. It really is designed to provide an overview of technology's strategic nature and the role in how to get technology implemented. So again, the whole thing is on strategy. This whole point is, what strategies do you need to understand from the provider side to get this technology in place to implement the exciting things that are happening in the health technology world. So why does this topic matter? There are a lot of reasons. They're actually in two categories, like you said. You'll see that I like to categorize things. So there are two sides. One is reactive and the other is proactive. On the reactive side, there are compliance issues that providers need to deal with, and there are also a whole raft of new payment incentives that are related or that are supported by or not supported by technology. So providers, hospitals, physicians, nursing homes, when I say providers, I'm talking about everybody. My background, of course, is more on the hospital side, so I'll probably default to that. But the point is, there's a lot of things in the environment that providers have to comply with, either from legal and technical standpoint, excuse me, or some impact on their payments. On the proactive side, there are all kinds of very exciting clinical breakthroughs, and there's a whole raft of new clinical communication, excuse me, clinical communication capabilities that are very exciting. So not only are providers having to react to the environment, but they can also take advantage of things that were not available previously that are now. So on the reactive side, let's talk about compliance a little bit. And falls into a couple of categories. One is privacy, and everybody knows about HIPAA, and there are other privacy requirements. So, that's the third rail. If you're dealing with a hospital and you can't demonstrate and support HIPAA compliance, don't even bother, because that's, cost of doing business. There are also a lot of interoperability requirements. The MACRA, Medicare Access and Chip Reauthorization Act, has a lot of requirements for reporting that are technology related. So if hospitals and physicians are having to comply with that, it's important for them to tap into the technology that supports that. And then the 21st Century Cures Act has a lot of requirements about information blocking and interoperability. It's more on the vendor side. So again, the purpose isn't to go into this detail, but just to tell you that on the minds of providers are compliance with federal and in some cases state requirements that have an impact on how they do business. On the other piece of the reactive side is new patient incentives and penalties. And if you've had any dealings with the hospital or physician side, you've probably heard these terms: value-based purchasing, readmission reduction program, hospital-acquired condition reduction. These are programs that are being required by the federal government that have an impact on how hospitals are paid, and if they don't meet certain standards, they're penalized on how they pay. So hit somebody in the pocketbook and they get pretty interested. So these are the reactive things that hospitals have to deal with, and physicians too. And the implications of not complying with these reactive requirements can be pretty significant. One is financial penalties. As I said, there are reduced payments that happen if you're not complying. And then if you're really, really bad, there are actually some penalties in a few cases that, on top of any reduced payment, there could be some fines or things like that. Also potentially legal action, especially around privacy things in HIPAA. So the last thing any provider wants is their name on the front page of the AJC saying, X hospital, breach of records, all this kind of stuff. If it's bad enough and it's shown wanton carelessness enough, there could be legal complications in addition to fines. And then you also have the public relations fallout. Look what happened to Equifax. It's just yesterday, I guess they were up in Congress testifying. So nobody wants that. So you have the ears of providers when it comes to compliance or payment-related issues. So here are some thoughts about dealing with the reactive requirements, and if your company as a vendor can help them with this, this is something that you can keep in mind to support what you're trying to offer to them. First of all, make sure the organization thoroughly understands the requirements. The first step in complying is understanding what you have to do. Secondly, commit adequate technical resources and expertise to fully comply. And then thirdly, set up a monitoring and process to respond to changes in requirements to meet all requirements, because this is a moving target. What's in place today, it's fairly stable. It doesn't change every week, but periodically there are changes. So providers need to understand what the new requirements are and stay current with those. Okay, so that's the reactive side. That's the side that's not very much fun. The cool stuff is what's happening on the proactive side with clinical breakthroughs, population health management support. Technology is doing a lot to support that, and care coordination that goes in hand in hand with that. So let's talk about this a little bit. Here's a very important statement from a renowned healthcare expert. It says, you heard it first, it's virtually impossible to maximize quality, manage populations, coordinate care, reduce costs, manage resources, comply with regulatory requirements, and operate under the new financial realities without tapping into emerging technologies that were not around even 5 years ago. And the renowned healthcare expert Glenn Pearson just said that, so you heard it here first. So that's what this is about. But I really believe that, because the environment's changed. Providers have to do things that they didn't have to do before, and they have the capability to do things that they weren't able to do before, and technology is what enables that. One of my pet peeves and I'll probably step on some toes here, I don't think it's a good idea for vendors to talk about their products as solutions, because to me a solution is something that, adopt it, it'll solve my problem. That's not the way technology works. Technology supports solutions. Technology is a part of fixing your problem, but it's calling it a solution implies that all you do is slap it in, walk away, and your problem's solved, and that's never the case. The adoption process is very complex, as you all know, and then there's always tweaking and monitoring and changes and updates that have to take place. So I personally recommend to my clients that they think about not using the word solution. If you use it, I'm not going to chastise you, but I think that creates the wrong message to providers. So healthcare technology should be a strategic priority for all healthcare delivery organizations. And again, the word is strategic. And the irony is that as soon as you mention the word technology, 90% of hospital senior executives will say, okay, technology, let me get my CIO in here. Okay, that probably needs to happen at some point. But if it gets relegated to the technology front and they don't understand it as a strategic need or strategic opportunity, there's a good chance it's going to be buried and get lost behind, a million other priorities that the IT department has. So this leads to my next point of leadership reaction. This is what I call the Great Divide. Many senior executives get it when it comes to technology, but I would say that many of them don't. And I have two little bullet points here. I like talking about this. I wrote a blog about a year ago called "Would You Rather Manage a Nuclear Power Plant or Buy Healthcare Technology?" And well, what do those two things have in common? Well, if you think about it, if I'm a senior executive, I may be really smart, I may be a great leader, great executive, know how to manage, know how to budget, all this stuff. What the heck do I know about nuclear power plants? Nothing. So I'm entirely dependent on the scientists and the content experts to tell me what I need to know. And I'm oversimplifying this a little bit because there are other sources, but essentially you're asking me to manage something that I really don't understand. So when the scientist in charge of reactor number 2 tells me, oh, don't worry, everything's under control, no problem. Well, if that thing melts down, guess whose job goes away? I'm responsible for that, and I really don't get it. So that makes me uncomfortable. And the other side of that is they may come to me and say, oh, if you don't spend $1 zillion to do, we are going to melt down. Well, how do I know? There are ways to find out, but my point is executives and leaders tend to get more emotionally invested in things that they understand and are enthusiastic about. And a lot of my colleagues in the healthcare executive world would rather not deal with this topic, and they do it if they have to. In fact, I was telling somebody before the meeting, There's a lady who works in at Atlanta Tech in their emerging technology area, Georgia Tech. And she was on the Georgia Hospital Association board for about 4 years. And I had lunch with her a while ago, and she said, every time you talk about technology things in front of the GHA board, which is made up of hospital executives, these were her exact words: I felt sorry for you because those guys didn't get it. They'd glaze over, they'd get up and get coffee, go to the bathroom, check their emails, And I'm not criticizing those guys, but if you don't get this stuff, you kind of don't understand how important it is, and it tends to not be at the top of the radar. So that leads into my second point. I have a quote there. I was talking to a colleague in healthcare who said to me, I've been in healthcare executive ranks for 27 years, and I've been able to avoid technology so far, and I have 7 years till I retire. If I can keep it that way, I'll be happy. Now, I don't know how representative that is, but I would say, I have no statistics, but I would say a very sizable minority, if not a majority, feel that way, because if that's not what they do, they'd rather avoid it if they can. Okay, so that's just the reality of the market that you're working in. All right, let's take a look at the status of the industry right now, which clearly in a rapid growth mode. I mean, if you're involved in HIMSS or any of the other groups and read any of the trade publications, you can see how much is happening in the technology front, and it's very exciting, but it's still woefully behind virtually every other industry. And the number that I hear all the time is about 10 to 15 years behind where everything else is. So the question is, why is this? How come healthcare is so bad? Is it because we're dumb? There are good reasons. For one thing, it's a splintered industry. We're not manufacturing air conditioners or cars, or, we're not in the retail business. We're dealing with all kinds of stuff. You have different providers. You have hospitals, physicians, nursing homes, home health, hospice, pharmaceuticals, durable medical equipment. I mean, all of these sub-industries are connected but not aligned, and they were never designed to work together, even though you could argue they should have been. But all the systems and all the internal operation things were set up in isolation from other ones, and therefore they're disjointed. So you're trying to connect information, connect data, connect processes across realms that were never designed to do that. It's also a very complex environment. This statement from Peter Drucker is pretty remarkable. He says, healthcare is the most difficult, chaotic, and complex industry to manage today. I take that pretty seriously. I mean, Drucker is, the man when it comes to organization stuff. So healthcare by nature is extremely complex. There's also the conservative nature of clinical care. Physicians and other clinicians are very, very concerned to make sure that, part of the Hippocratic oath is to do no harm. So if you're trying to introduce an unproven technology, whether it's patient touching or not, there's a lot of resistance to make sure that what you're trying to do is not going to in any way harm my patient. So it's appropriately conservative. And then, of course, it's expensive. And, every dollar that is spent on technology is a dollar that can't be spent somewhere else. And there's a lot of competition for that. So the question becomes, if that's the case now, why are we seeing the change? Why are we seeing the exciting growth and the opportunities that are in healthcare that weren't here before? And there are several reasons. I think one of the biggest ones is what I call the internet revolution of the late 1990s. When was the last time you went onto a website and tried to buy something or sign up for an email list or something and couldn't do that? What do you mean I can't order that publication? Or what do you mean I can't reserve my hotel room? What's wrong with you? Now 20 years ago, it was a novelty to be able to do that. Well, nowadays, if you can't do that, you're considered totally archaic. So there's been a complete change of mindset in the public where they expect that right now. And this has permeated all parts of the business world, including delivery of healthcare services. Second big thing is the coming of the cloud, and related to that is SaaS. Just the ability to manage this data, manage updates, manage access to things remotely has been enormous. It's freed up all kinds of internal capabilities, made it a lot cheaper, made it more flexible. You don't have to go around to every little PC and get the latest version of Office on your PC. You just do it one time and it proliferates out. So the ease of the industry has really helped that as well. And then probably, I think the biggest one is the explosion of smartphones and tablets. Now, I used to do this question, and people would be surprised at the answer, but there's been too much publicity around this recently that people know the answer. But I used to ask audiences, okay, when was the first iPhone sold? And I'd have people say, oh, I don't know, was it like, 2000? Or I've had people say as early as 1997, whatever. Well, we came up on the 10-year anniversary this year, so we know that it was 2007. The first iPad was sold in 2010. And, there were smartphones and there were tablets before that, but I don't know what Apple's magic is, but somehow they waved their magic wand, and that just pushed it out into the culture to where everybody has smartphones, everybody has tablets. And that, of course, brings capability to my pocket that was never there before. And with that, it brings the expectation that I should be able to do everything I want to instantly. And when you have kids, and my wife just retired as a middle school teacher, and when every kid in her classroom in 7th grade has a smartphone, you know that it's permeated society. So here's some other thoughts. Futurist Eric Topol made the comment that he said, smartphones will soon be able to capture physiological data from any organ or system, run routine labs, perform medical grade scans, track environmental exposure to hazards, do most of physical exams, and connect with physicians and others instantly. So that's, if you think he's right, which I do, that's where this is headed, said by a really smart guy. And this is having a huge impact on people's expectations and also what the care delivery side can do. So another futurist named Joe Flower made a comment about the Internet of Things, and he said that we will soon have, and some of these are already in place, we will soon have sensors in the toilet, mirrors, TVs, health watches, contact lenses, and smart patches and implants. Just look at the Echo device that probably many of you have in your kitchen or bedroom or wherever it is, monitoring constantly. It's really odd when I'm having a conversation with my wife and all of a sudden the little dot in the corner starts talking to me because it thinks I said something that, triggered a response. But this is happening everywhere. So that's another major factor in the environment that's bringing this to the forefront. So summary thought on this part, why healthcare technology matters. First of all, there are new demands from the environment, both on the regulatory side, payment side, and patient changes or patient expectations. And then the proactive side is the new capabilities for medical breakthroughs and revolutionary communications capabilities. Okay, so that's why this matters. That's where we're at as an industry. That's why it's changing in such exciting ways. And that's why this is a great opportunity for so many people. So let's talk now about the two big buckets of healthcare technology. So like I said, I like to put things in categories. And my buckets are, first one is traditional technology. And in that I include IT infrastructure, all the pipes and connections and, drives and all that stuff. Second one is electronic health records. Third one is compliance issues. And the reason I call these traditional is that they are essentially cost of doing business items that any major size hospital or physician office or nursing home, you can't do business without this stuff. So it's not exciting. It's not, you don't advertise your hospital, say, come to our hospital because we have an EHR. It's like saying, come to our hospital because we have elevators. Of course you have an EHR. So this is something you need to have to be there, but it's not really changing anything so much as it is just keeping current with what is the expectation of the industry. The emerging disruptive transformational technology is what gets me excited, and that's where most of my clients are on this side of things. Things like telemedicine, telehealth, smartphone-based peripherals, mobile apps, mobile patient-provider communication ability, big data, predictive analytics, personalized medicine, wearable technologies, 3D printing, bionic limbs, genomics, and DNA sequencing. So these are the things that are changing the way healthcare is being delivered. And I tell people I spent 30 years in the hospital industry helping to rearrange the dysfunctionality and chaos, because we used to consider it a great victory at Georgia Hospital Association when we'd go through the General Assembly process, the budgeting for Medicaid, and we didn't get a cut in Medicaid this year. Hallelujah, we didn't get cut in our payment. We didn't make any progress, and medical inflation still eats away at it, but we didn't lose money in our payment structures. Isn't that great? Well, how does that fix anything? And I'm not criticizing that. That needs to take place and all that, but that doesn't change the way care is being delivered. These things do. And, if you're working in a company that, I know we have a gentleman here that works with infant growth and, tracking of newborns, getting them out of the hospital better in a more efficient way. I just had my first grandchild, and, I'm very interested in that topic. So, if your technology helps my grandson thrive, I'm very interested in that. Now, if you're not particularly tuned into that, you may not care, but there are other things that are dealing with cardiac issues, with oncology, orthopedics. So there are thousands of these innovations taking place every day that are being introduced to the market that over time, 5 years from now, as these proliferate through the market, it'll change the way care is being delivered. And I find that very exciting. So within the second bucket of emerging disruptive technology, my sub-bucket is what I call the forefronts of health technology revolution. And I'll just go through these really quickly. First one is patient touching. And that's anything that literally touches the patient. So things like diagnostics, intervention, or devices are implantable. So under diagnostics, you have things like wearable technologies, Fitbits and monitors and things like that. You have MRI technology, teleradiology, it touches the patient encounter type thing. Under intervention, you have stem cell therapy, laparoscopic surgery, robotic surgery. And then under devices and implantables, beyond the obvious devices, you have things like 3D printing and cardiovascular implants, things like that, that literally have a direct impact on how that care is delivered. So that's the first bucket, patient touching. The second one is personalized medicine. And this is evidence-based and data-driven customization of care based on my personal traits and circumstances. So in other words, I'm unique. I have my own DNA. I have my own medical history and all that. There are some really cool things that are emerging where my physicians or my care team can develop responses for my needs based on my individual circumstances. It's basically a merger of things like population health, big data, predictive analytics. And these fall into two categories, largely clinical and largely care coordination. So this includes the predictive aspects of big data. If you can take my information and say, well, based on your DNA and based on your medical history, we're going to run it through these algorithms, and we think these are the possible or likely directions that things might go for you, so let's develop a care plan around that. And it also involves genomics, supporting cancer research and other areas, and also automation of evidence-based protocols. So in other words, there are a lot of scientific evidence. There is a lot of scientific evidence about what are the most effective treatment plans, and this is being automated in a way that's accessible to clinicians that wasn't available before. So again, going back to our friend Eric Topol, he talks about clinical algorithm recommendations, and he's talking about IBM Watson, which is the machine that beat the Jeopardy champ, but of course it's been applied in healthcare now. He's talking about that IBM Watson to the fourth power. Now he's not saying IBM Watson times 4. He's saying IBM Watson times IBM Watson, which is square. 3 is cube, and this is to the fourth power. So just the exponential growth of that. Again, he may be overstating or optimistic, right? But that's mind-boggling when you think about that. It almost it's certainly not infinite, but it's certainly beginning to approach pretty impressive levels. And then he also talks about a planetary medical knowledge resource. So this stuff is accessible anywhere on the planet, and it's becoming increasingly so. So that's the personalized medicine aspect. The third bucket was communications, and that's between patients and providers to monitor patient progress, allowing for early intervention. So I'm discharged from a hospital, I'm at discharge orders. They have no idea if I'm complying or if I'm, getting that home health visit that I was supposed to get. Well, there are now some really cool apps that will help track that, and other technologies that will help let the providers, the care team, know whether I'm compliant, track my progress. If I start to get out of range, if my vitals start going in the wrong direction, they can say, okay, we're tracking 300 patients. These 6 seem to be heading the wrong way. We better get on the phone and find out what's going on. You can't do that without technology. It gets back to my famous statement. You can't do this stuff without the enabling technology we have today. And then there's also communication among providers where that gets to the post-discharge thing that I was talking about. So it helps both the patient and the provider stay in touch, and the providers stay in touch among themselves, so that when I'm alerted as a care coordinator, I can contact the pharmacy to say, I see that, Mr. Pearson didn't pick up his prescription. Can you verify that? Or, whatever the intervention needs to be. So that's communications, the third one. The fourth one is business functions. This falls into two categories: clinical applications and then non-clinical applications, which are more standard business activities. So, clinical would be lean process improvement, looking at throughput through the OR, using data and analytics to see where the bottlenecks are. It also can involve automating clinical tests, allowing providers to operate to the top of their capability. One really cool example I heard, and this is something that I never would have thought of, but I was reading about this in Modern Healthcare magazine. What happens a lot of times is your prescription coverage requirements change. So if I'm on a maintenance med for whatever, I'm taking it every month and I get it renewed every 3 months by mail order or every month at the pharmacy, well, my insurance company may change the requirements, and now instead of paying a $20 copay, they say, oh, we're not covering that anymore. That'll be $175, please. So I go, wait a minute, I'm not paying that. So I call the doctor back up and I say, okay, I need something else. And then he or she has to take time and go and look it up and all that. Well, there is technology that allows that physician to find out, to match my insurance requirements, my current insurance requirements, to what's available and figure out which is the best prescription. So he can delegate that task to somebody else in the office rather than having to be the one that personally does that. So again, these little things may not seem like a big deal, but you add them up and it gets pretty impressive, the changes that take place. So the last section that I want to talk about is requirements for success. So we've talked about where the industry is, where it's heading, kind of the framework to think about this stuff. Well, if you're either a provider, an internal enthusiast wanting to get this introduced to your organization, or you're a vendor selling to people, or in any other way interacting with providers, that you want to get this technology part of that, there's certain things that have to take place in order for this to be successful. So I'd like to talk about that a little bit. All four of the fronts that I mentioned, the patient touching, the personalized medicine, the communications, and then the business functions, all of these require these things in order to be implemented. So it doesn't matter if it's a medical device or a new HR system for the hospital to work with. So first of all, and some of these are pretty obvious, first of all, you need internal support of key staff. Hospitals are extremely complex organizations. Even larger physician practices have layers of bureaucracy. If you don't have the right people on your side, it's never going to happen. And it typically, I was talking to somebody before the session, said, how do we change the sales cycle from 2 years down to something reasonable? And that's a real challenge because there's so many people involved, so much has to take place that you have to get everybody on board. You also need the underlying infrastructure to support that. If it's a technology, service, or product, and it touches your hospital IT system in any way, that's kind of a black hole. I'm not, dinging my IT CIO friends, but that creates a whole new set of issues, and you need to have their support in order for that to work. Also, there are operational changes that may have to take place, which can be a lot more formidable and considerable than many people realize. So another requirement, it has to be actionable. And the example I have down here, if you're doing an analytic study of your ER and looking at throughput and one of those business functions, and you go through this whole process and they say, you know what, your ER is too small. And you say, well, that's great. I kind of knew that before you did the study, and I'm landlocked. There's no way to expand. So thanks for telling me what I already knew without giving me a solution. So that's kind of a crude example, but a lot of times you'll find things from data analytic side that tell you things that you already know, but unless there's a way to operationalize that, it really doesn't do any good. And then a really important one is a solid and credible ROI. And I wish I had more time to talk about that, but I do want to mention this is probably the biggest area of error that I see vendors making in dealing with hospitals. They come up with ROI numbers. I call these ROI numbers that only your mother would believe. Okay, I've heard just absolutely incredible things. I had one guy tell me he could demonstrate a 3-month payback on that. So I said, okay, give me a try. He went through it, and I go, no. So the 3 mistakes people tend to make is that they sell their product on efficiency of operation. So we can cut, 2 minutes per procedure from your process, and that'll save you a lot of money. And this is great. A good friend of mine who's a owner of a health technology company gave me this example. He used to work for a company that sold EHRs, and he said it was in a head-to-head meeting going against another EHR vendor. And the EHR vendor that he was going against used this logic to sell his product. He said, our product can save half a second per physician click. So we're so fast that the physician will get the response a half a second faster than anyone else in the market. And then he had some numbers, and a physician does an average of 40 clicks per visit. So that's 20 seconds per visit, and then they do so many visits a day, and then so many a week, and then every new office visit you have gets you on average $85. So you're opening up your capability, which is getting in the second one, getting additional revenue. So basically his bottom line was, if you don't use our product, you're losing, I think it was $14,000 per physician per year, because you're not taking advantage of the half a second click advantage that we have. Really? You think that you're going to half a second times 40 clicks per visit, you're going to increase your throughput to the tune of $14,000 a year? The guy was laughed out of the room, which he should have been. And that kind of gets to the next. My point in the first one is that savings may be great, but unless you can capture them and send people home early, if it's, you're saving 3 minutes a procedure times 20 procedures a day, it's at 60 minutes, and you're paying that, billing clerk, whatever, who knows how much an hour, $40 an hour, $30 an hour. Guess what? You're not going to send them home at 7 hours. They're still on the payroll. Now, they may be doing other things that weren't done before, but you're not saving $1. So you cannot take that savings to write a check to pay for the technology. And I've seen more over and over again vendors use that logic. And then that gets in the second. So this guy who had the 3-month payback said, well, that may be true, but we'll open up the opportunity for new revenue. Okay, that's an interesting theory. Are you literally turning patients away? I mean, are there patients that are lining up and calling your office and saying, because I can't get in for 2 months, I'm going to go somewhere else? There are some clinical areas where that happens, but not a lot. So just because even if you're able to capture some of the savings and free up somebody's time, there may not be a queue of people that are being turning away right now because of inefficiency. So that doesn't work entirely either. So I'll grant you that in some cases it will, but then that leads to the third mistake, which is, do I really want those new patients from a financial standpoint? Of course, I want them from clinical care. We're there to take care of patient needs. But if you have a patient who's on a fixed payment system, like a capitated payment or accountable care organization payment, where you're getting a fixed fee regardless of how much they use or don't use, if you're bringing on new patients, you're actually taking on new expenses, because you have disposables in there. You may need to take on extra staff or whatever. So those new patients may actually be costing you money. And the other thing is, if they're a Medicaid patient, the national statistic is that Medicaid pays about 60% of what it costs a hospital to provide care across the board. So you're losing money. Now, that's on a full cost accounting basis. There's incremental marginal revenue, which might have some offsetting value. But just because it's a new Medicaid patient doesn't necessarily mean it's financial benefit. And if they have no insurance at all, if a hospital gets paid or collects 25% of what they spend, not what they charge, not what they want to get, but what they spend, that's not a bad recuperate. So if I'm getting new patients that have no insurance, I'm losing maybe 75% of what I'm spending on that. So that's not a financial advantage. And I'm not saying the hospital shouldn't do that. There's clinical care value and, obligation to society and moral imperative, all that stuff. But this is not a compelling argument from a financial standpoint. So that was a little aside on ROI mistakes. But so ROI, solid ROI is something you're going to be pushed back on really hard. So those are some things that are required for all of the 4 buckets. And then I have some thoughts on individual ones, that this is what these individual buckets need for to get adopted internally. Under the patient touching side, you need compliance with rigid regulatory requirements. If you have anything that touches a patient physically or has a direct clinical care path involvement, FDA needs to be involved in that, which is an extensive and expensive process, and anybody who deals with that is aware of that. But you just need to comply with whatever regulatory requirements are there. And then secondly, you need supportive key clinical staff. So if your physicians or other caregivers don't believe that whatever technology you have is going to solve the problem, it's never going to take place. So you need the support of everybody involved, and the quickest way to kill it is to have the key physician, the key surgeon, or obstetrician or whatever the area is say, I don't like this because there's some clinical reason why it's not a good idea. Well, forget it. It's not going to happen. Okay, on the personalized medicine side, you need rock-solid underlying data and clinical algorithms to withstand possible challenges. I probably should say probable challenges from clinicians. So a lot of times clinicians will say, I don't like the clinical logic behind this. It's flawed. And they're probably right. There are very few clinical algorithms that are 100% perfect. Some are better than others. A lot of times the data that supports this could be out of date, but it is what it is. There's certain data things that just can't be achieved quicker than they are, and this is the best we have. And if you can get better data, use it, but typically whoever is involved in these projects is getting the best data that's available. Resistance over the idea that a machine can do better than I can do it as a clinician. There's a lot of pride in what they do, and I'm not being critical, but people say, well, I went to medical school for 4 years and 5 years of residency and all that, and then you're telling me a machine's smarter than I am? Well, maybe. IBM Watson beat the Jeopardy guy, and one way to handle that is to say, we're not telling you, Mr. or Mrs. Physician, what to do. We're giving you a starting point so that you can factor this data into your clinical judgment, and this is a really good way to begin to think about what this patient needs are. So there are ways to kind of finesse that. And then if you're dealing with a project that has comparative with other providers in the area, if some of the key providers are not in the group, then people say, well, that's great, but I wish Hospital X were in there. Well, so do I, but they're not. Doesn't mean that the project is worthless. Clearly you want to get as much relevant data as you can, but the fact you don't have everybody doesn't mean there's no value in that. So that's what's required on the personalized medicine side. On the communication side, this is pretty obvious. You need to identify who needs to be in your communication channel. If you're missing pharmacy as part of your post-care communication channel, and that's a relevant thing for the patient condition, then you're missing an important piece of information. Then you also have to have what are called BAAs, or business associate agreements, in place because of privacy requirements. So there are certain structural things that have to take place in order for this to work. On the business function side, there really wasn't anything in particular than what's required on the overall requirements for success. So those are the positive side of saying what are requirements to make this work. And the last thing I want to do is mention some global pitfalls, which are kind of the negative side, pointing out some things that could kill a project if you're not careful. So first of all is underestimating the possible disruption to existing operational processes or the concern for additional workload. And I mentioned this earlier, change means change. And not everybody likes change. In fact, most people don't like change. And if you're introducing a technology that requires me to change the way I do things, even if in the long run it's going to save me time and money and I'm going to be happier, there's resistance to that. So you have to be really thoughtful about the implication on how business is being done before you get too far down the road. Secondly, underestimating the resistance from people or departments whose status or revenue could be threatened. Now, this is huge. Hospitals are very compartmentalized, and there's definite pecking order, and there's definite turf battles. And I headed up a project in a hospital in Michigan, years ago, dealing with geriatric case management, and I had to get the head of the internal medicine department, the physician in charge of internal medicine, in the same room as the chairman of the Department of Family Practice. And those two were not, professionally, those can be kind of rivalries in the turnout. In this case, there's also personal animosity between the two. But, you would think that physicians would all be on the same page. They're not necessarily. the different disciplines, and then you have nursing, and you have social work, and you have finance, and you have all these people. And if you're introducing a technology that can change the pecking order, whoever's on the wrong side of that is not going to miss that and could easily find ways to not like your project and go out of their way to have it not work. Okay, another global pitfall is having to run all technology-related offerings through IT and getting squeezed out by other priorities. And again, I'm not being critical of my CIO friends. They're greatly overworked. They have 1 million priorities, but typically there are dozens, if not 100 or more things on their punch list to do, and you're going to become number 114. And that's part of your huge delays that people talk about. Okay, another one, there could be a possible preference for single source suppliers rather than best of breed, depending on what it is that you're trying to get implemented, and that balance tips from 5-year period to 5-year period. The industry, sways toward let's go best of breed, and then say, well, no, it's too complicated, let's do single source. If you're introducing something that amounts to single source in an organization where their mindset is best of breed, where their mindset is single source, that can be a real problem. Another related thing is getting possible resistance from an incumbent technology company who is kind of next door to what you do, and they say, oh, I can do that too. It's under development, or we'll have version 1.0 in 2 months. Why don't you just wait for that? That can happen as well too. So then we're back to my lack of senior executive enthusiasm, back to the would you rather manage the nuclear power plant or buy health technology? If the senior guys don't get it, and ladies, that's a generic term, guys, I'm from the north. If they don't get it, it can be really hard to get the thing implemented. Then you have extreme sensitivity about security vulnerabilities. And again, everybody knows about Equifax. And especially people that are not technology oriented, they say, I don't understand this stuff. All I know is that I keep reading about data breaches in modern healthcare. All I know is that if Equifax couldn't protect themselves, why do I think I can? So, don't make me do more than I have to do. And then there's also a concern about assuming additional risk. I've talked to a lot of vendors that say, wow, our technology will give the clinicians more information about that patient so they can make better decisions. That's wonderful. But you know what? If you give me tons of data and I'm missing something or I don't act on that, I can envision myself as a physician being on the defense stand 5 years from now supporting a malpractice case. And they say, well, Dr. Pearson, I understand that your hospital had this technology in place that provided this data. Didn't you take that into consideration? How did you miss that? So as much as more information is wonderful, it also creates liability concerns, and you need to be aware of that. And there are ways around all these pitfalls, or at least ways to soften them. But you just need to be aware that when you're either an internal enthusiast trying to get this implemented or somebody trying to sell into hospitals, that these things are going to be things that you're likely to run into. So my last 2 slides, parting thoughts. Technology is one of the few areas where healthcare delivery can actually be improved. And this gets back to what I said before. There are hundreds of changes being introduced all the time that over time will have an impact on what care delivery looks like a few years down the road. There are many challenges, and that's certainly an understatement. I just gave you a bunch of them, and there are many more. I actually identified 76 pitfalls of selling to hospitals, so I only gave you a few of them here. So there are a lot of things that you have to overcome. But bottom line is that the healthcare technology space is a great place to be in. It's exciting. There are all kinds of things happening. There are all kinds of success stories. There are all kinds of failure stories too. But it's a very dynamic and very exciting place to be. So last slide, my contact information. I blog on health technology issues every 3 weeks. I'll be happy to add you to my list if you're not on it. So just drop me an email, and I'll be happy to include you. So I believe we have 10 minutes. So I wanted to leave time for questions and reactions. Yes, sir.
A lot of terrific insights. Thanks, Glenn.
Thank you.
You said that hospitals are increasingly using apps and other ways to track patient compliance and adherence to treatments and medications.
Right.
When they leave with these apps or download these apps, is this something that, like say Piedmont Hospital, their IT team builds it, or they bring in a vendor to build it. But if they bring a vendor, do they call it, app by Piedmont Hospital, or is Piedmont Hospital fine with the vendor using their name on it?
So the question is, do hospitals build or buy? Do they build their own apps or buy them? It's going to be a combination, but I would say the most common is just to buy things because, hospital IT departments are not sitting around with excess staff looking to fill up their days. So if you can come in with a good app that addresses the need, now it may need to be customized a little bit, and they may want to, put their own name on it, but I haven't seen a whole lot of people starting from scratch. The most common thing is to just buy an app, and then this is probably the second most common thing is to buy something and then adapt it and maybe label it from the hospital.
What are the venues where hospitals go to find these kind of technology?
Well, they don't have to go to find them. It's the other way around. They have to keep people out the door. I was co-chairing a meeting out in Beverly Hills about a year ago, and a CIO from a hospital stood up saying, his talk was on how to get through to the CIO. And he started his talk by saying, let me just read you the first line. I get 200 emails a day. Most of them are from vendors and, listserv and that type of thing. And he just said, let me just read the first line of these vendors. The vendor IT things is, hi, hope you're doing well. Hope things are going well for you. Hi, how's everything going at your hospital? And he kind of made a joke of the fact that every one of these things started with this generic, hope you're doing well type thing. He says, when I read those, well, first of all, I don't open most of them. But then when I do open them and I see that, I know it's from a vendor, and that's about as far as I read. So to answer your question, how do they find these apps? It's the other way around. How do their job, they feel like they're keeping vendors out because they're inundated and they don't, so it's a real trick to penetrate the veil to get their attention. Now, having said that, there are times when a certain clinical area will say, we really need to investigate a certain thing, so let's do an RFP. And, that does happen. But in terms of the volume of communication, the vast majority is inbound. Yes, sir.
I was just going to point out one of the things you're talking about with the amount of data that physicians are having to deal with now, and the fact that some of them are reluctant to be able to have the machine be smarter than them.
Right.
I was just reading where in the 50s, the medical information was doubling every 50 years.
Right.
By 2020, it's expected to double every 73 days. So the typical medical student that would be graduating in 2020, what they learned 7 years in their first year, 7 years before, it's less than 6%
Right.
of the total amount of information
Right.
that they would need to have available to them to make
Right.
a good diagnosis.
Yep.
So are you seeing that in your practice?
The question was, or the comment was, with medical information doubling so quickly, how does that factor in? I think people are becoming more, I had that bullet point saying, you're saying a machine's smarter than I am. I think clinicians are accepting that more now, because again, so much of this, okay, in order for something to work in a hospital, you have to get everybody on the same page. So I've spent 30 years in a climate where the goal is, how do I convince everybody to do this? And I'm not talking about selling your soul or anything immoral or anything like that, but okay, I need to be able to look at this from everybody's perspective. So I think the way to approach it with clinicians is to say, you're the expert, no machine is telling you what to do, but because the information is doubling so fast, nobody can keep up with that. So why don't you let us plug in this big data analytics and the algorithms and the genomics and all that, and let it spit out an assessment as a starting point. And you can say, I realize that's what the data tells me, but something tells me that that's just not the case. I'm not bound to do that. So if you can bring them into the equation and respect them and say, we're enabling you. That's why solution is a terrible word. If you're saying to the physician, well, this algorithm is a solution to your diagnostic problems, he'll say, or she'll say, you get out of here. But if you say, we're helping you doing even a better job than you're doing by giving you information that's customized to that patient, that's a whole lot easier for them to respond to. And they want to respond. Of course they want to do the right thing for the patient. Other questions or comments? Yes, sir.
You mentioned all the information, and that could actually be a liability or envisioned or perceived liability for the
Right.
physician. What are some potential solutions to counter that?
Okay, the question is, if physicians perceive additional information as liability, what do you do about that? First thing is you need to acknowledge that, and then be careful that any technology that you're bringing in doesn't create undue risk without additional advantage. So a good example of that is, your Fitbit. And, I've had a bunch of physicians say to me, you know what, I love Fitbits, but I really don't care to see Pearson's blood pressure constantly streaming through my office, and they're not going to look at it. So, that's an extreme example of useless data. So they don't want that data because somewhere in there, again, in the nightmare scenario, you're on the defense stand somewhere down the road over a malpractice case. Some some attorney could, take some useless information buried under reams and reams and reams of data and accuse me of that. So I guess part of the answer is, if you're going to provide new information, make sure it's actionable, and make sure it's something that's perceived of value, and then also make sure you have systems in place to alert you to what you need to know from that data, so that you're not in the situation of having a little time bomb in there that everybody missed. So, and that's easier said than done, but all this stuff is finesse and balancing, one need against the risk on that. So I don't know if that helps. Other questions or comments?
How fast do you see a lot of these technology changes that you're talking about starting to impact healthcare?
How quickly are these things having an impact? They're having them right now. Things are different now than they were 3 years ago. And one of the things that's really cool for me, I get to work with companies that are introducing all kinds of neat things. And, every week I'm coming across a company that's doing something I had no idea anybody's even working on. A lot of things I can't pronounce, a lot of clinical conditions I didn't even know it existed, and you have a solution for that, that's great. So, yeah, it's happening now, and to your point from before, I think the rate of change is accelerating. And again, because people expect technology in every part of their life, patients are demanding, they're not resisting technology like they might have done 5 or 10 years ago. So it's happening now, and I think it's just going to increase.
Talking about mobile having such a large impact in the mobile devices, are there any new devices that you've seen lately that are revolutionary in that space?
Well, yes. This is more on the business side, but some of you, I'm sure, are familiar with the concept of blockchain. And I don't think this is going to have any clinical impact, but in terms of the communication and the efficiency, blockchain is what's behind Bitcoin. And I've heard IBM had a half-day seminar here back in June, and I tend to pay attention to very, very broad statements that are made by credible sources. And IBM at this point, and some other respected, like Forbes magazine, and respected business executives have made statements like, blockchain is the most revolutionary, will have the greatest and most revolutionary impact on business function that we've had in a century, or even longer. Now, again, I'm not an IT guy, and I can't explain exactly how it works, but I've heard things like that over and over and over again. And from the business side of things and the efficiency side and how things operate, that can have a huge impact on how care is delivered in a non-clinical sense. So that's probably the biggest thing on the horizon, by way of a platform type thing. Okay, time for one more question, I think. Anybody? All right, well, thank you so much for your attention. Thanks for coming. I hope you found it worthwhile, and I'll stick around afterwards if anybody has more questions. Thank you.